Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to Empty Cloud Monastery. So we're here with Aya Soma to my right, and Bante J to my left, and a group of delightful people here at the monastery this evening, and a group of delightful people watching remotely. So I see a few people checking in so far. So hello to Rick, Frank, TJ, Vivian, Yudi, and Karen. Welcome. And the topic for this evening is monastic aspirations. So what does it mean to be a bhikkhuni or a bhikkhu? What is it that draws one to this kind of life? What's the nature of this life, and what makes it suitable or maybe not so suitable for different people? So we can start by paying homage to the Buddha. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddham dhammam sangham namasami. So maybe we can invite Ayasoma to get us started on this topic. And we'll all contribute to it, and we'll also happily take any questions you might have related to the topic. So I see some off-topic questions, which look like great questions for monk chat tomorrow evening. But if you have questions related to the topic of monastic aspiration, you can put those in. So please, Ayasoma, if you'd like to start us off.
Thank you, Bante, for always challenging me. Or throwing me under the bus and always having to be the one who has to start. So where to start? It's actually quite interesting because I feel like obviously all three of us had a monastic aspiration, which is why we became monastics. And so far, whenever I hear monastic stories, I always kind of feel like we all had an idea what it was to be a monastic, and then we kind of all were like, oh, wait, it's a little bit different than what I thought. So, for example, I thought that I was just going to retreat from society and do a lot of meditation practice. And paradoxically, actually, one of the things that really, I guess, kind of shocked me in a way was the fact that actually you become so visible and so public. I kind of already knew that because I had spent so much time when I was a layperson following Bhante Sudaso, and we started this organization together. So I knew that, when we were walking in New York City, everybody was looking at him because he looked a little bit odd. But I guess it was a little bit different when then that person became me. And the fact that people are constantly approaching you, whether they are actually devouts of the teachings of the Buddha, or they have no idea who you are, but you're very, very visible. So that was something that definitely I was not ready for, and it took me a while. Also, the actual experience of interdependence that we can't escape as monastics, which was, of course, in theory, very much well presented, but it was very interesting in starting to practice in that way was very, very difficult, and to a certain degree it still is. That delusion of being an independent woman. I was very attached to that delusion. Then all of a sudden was completely removed for me. Yeah, as soon as I took my vows, and it can feel very displacing because all of a sudden it seems like you have no kind of say in pretty much anything. you don't have money, you can't decide where to go. You live in a monastery, you have to somewhat always flow as a river. Your conduct in a monastery impacts also all the other people in a monastery. So there's lots of different more nuances that come into on your plate that then condition your life. And then, of course, you have to live with many different people, lots of different husbands, wives, and everything in between, without, obviously, in a celibate way, in a platonic way. But kind of like similar dynamics can happen that really make you understand also what to actually, in a deeper way, what also all our lay folks are experiencing in their lives, and also what we have experienced, I guess, as lay people as well, when we were not living in a community and when relationships felt really special. So anyway, I'm kind of going round in circles because I was not expecting to be the first one to to speak. So maybe I'll pass it on to my venerable friends and take it from there.
Well, first off, I'd like to say a little bit about if somebody is intending to enter monastic life. I'd like to say a bit about the underlying intention, because there can be many different reasons why someone becomes interested in becoming a monk of one sort or another. So it's good to remember that ultimately in Buddhism, the Buddhist monastic order was created solely for the purpose of helping people attain full awakening. That's its only purpose. So if one wants to enter into monastic life, it should be solely for this purpose, solely because one wishes to attain awakening, and one wishes to have a lifestyle, a set of conditions which are optimal for attaining awakening. That's the only purpose for this life. So if one has any other motivation whatsoever, then I recommend not becoming a Buddhist monastic. But if one's aspiration is complete awakening as quickly as possible, then becoming a Buddhist monk can seem possibly quite suitable, depending upon the individual. So just putting that out there just to start, like one's aspiration should be to attain full awakening. And monastic life it's ultimately a life of renunciation. It's a life of letting go. So letting go of our preferences first and foremost. So letting go of our preferences in terms of what we wear, preferences in terms of how we style our hair, in terms of what makeup or jewelry we wear, preferences in terms of when we eat and what we eat, preferences in terms of often who we live with. So you have a little bit of choice in the matter in terms of choosing a monastery to begin one's training in. But often many of the residents of the community are not really people that you choose, and they're not really people that you necessarily like or even want to be anywhere near. So letting go of one's preferences in terms of companions and housemates. And then we take on training roles which are quite inconvenient. So if one's goal is to suck as much sensory pleasure out of life as you can, then monastic life is a really bad idea. You're not going to get a whole lot of easy access to sensual pleasure as a monastic, very, very little actually. And the precepts and practices that we take on, they're actually meant to be challenging. So monastic life is not meant to be something easy. I remember when I first became a Buddhist monk, several of my family members, uncles and aunts and cousins, and so on, they thought I'd taken the easy way out, that I was just like lounging back and relaxing in some peaceful place somewhere. And I was like, do you have any idea what my life is like as a monk? Do you have any idea the challenges and difficulties that we face on a daily basis? It's actually much easier being a layperson. And the reason it's easier is because you get to hide from your defilements all the time. There's all kinds of ways that you can distract yourself and entertain yourself and avoid facing your own inner demons. And trust me, you have lots of them. And in monastic life, you can't hide from them anymore. And actually, our lifestyle is designed to strip away all of the layers of protective delusion that we coat over our defilements. So you start to see all that awful stuff inside your mind, which you've been quietly pretending wasn't there. You start to see it very clearly. And yeah, it's not easy. It's actually quite difficult. And also facing, again, in terms of letting go of preferences, well, this means that you actually come face to face with your preferences. People come to the monastery and they're like, oh, I'm not that obsessed with food. And it's like, well, just wait, we'll see. You give it a couple of weeks and we'll see just how obsessed with food you really are. People come and they're like, oh yeah, I like to meditate. And it's like, oh, do you? Okay, we'll see. We'll see how this one goes. So, and another really important element of monastic life is letting go of expectation. So, as Ayasoma was alluding to earlier, monastic life is often not quite what one expects it to be. So, it's actually often worth asking yourself, if you've never spent any time in a monastery, ask yourself what you think it's going to be like. And whatever you come up with, it's almost certainly wrong. And you actually go and you spend some time in a monastery and you're like, oh, it's not quite what I thought it would be. And of course, there's many different kinds of Buddhist monasteries, so different traditions and lineages and different practice styles and different emphases. So some places put more or less importance on meditation. Some put more or less importance on precepts. Some put more or less importance on study. Some are more secluded in the wilderness. Some are right in the middle of big cities. So there's actually a huge variety. But the fundamental similarity is, again, the precepts that we take. So it's this practice of taking on deliberate self-restrictions as a way of cultivating purity of mind and self-awareness and self-restraint. And it's a commitment to constantly exploring renunciation, constantly exploring what it means to practice the Noble Eightfold Path to its furthest limit. And this is, again, it's not necessarily something easy, and it's not necessarily something even desirable for many people. But if one is thoroughly committed to awakening, and one has this deep faith that awakening is possible, then monastic life can be an incredibly powerful support to that end. So just a few more thoughts. Maybe Bhante J, if you'd like to jump in and say a few words on the overall topic.
So I guess I would speak a little bit about understanding the framework of monasticism within the greater framework of Buddhism. And in this, to understand this, you have to understand what the Buddha called the Fourfold Assembly. So the Buddha, we can read in the suttas where the Buddha says that right when the Buddha becomes awakened, Mara comes to the Buddha and says, just okay, you became awakened, all nice and good, go away now, go away. And the Buddha says, no, I will not leave until I have a Fourfold Assembly. Right? And the Buddha explains the Fourfold Assembly are men and women monastics and men and women lay people. And these men and women monastics and men and women lay people need to be learned, practiced, right? They need to know what the Buddha called, this term Buddhism is a more modern term, but you read in the suttas, what the Buddha called what would later become his religion is the Dhamma and Vinaya, right? The teaching and the discipline. And so the monastics find themselves in this symbiotic relationship with laity. right? And their place in that symbiotic relationship is important to understand. This is monastics and laity are to work together to keep the teachings going for a long time, right? Monastics can't go to work and make money, so we don't contribute to the continuation of the Dhamma with that way. But we continue, our ancient ancestors, talking about us, our bhikkhus and bhikkhunis of ancient times, they kept the teachings going, right? They memorized it and they kept the teachings going, and they were very learned and skilled, and then they also practiced well. Right? So this is an important thing to understand about the framework. Even to this day, it's a little bit different. The relationship between monastics and lay people, it's a little bit different today than it was back in the early text. You can read it, but it's still an important thing to understand. Right? It's an important thing to understand the relationship between a lay person and a monastic. Right? When you become a monastic, when you become a samanera, usually, you're to reflect on the Dasa Dhamma. These are 10 things that are different when you become a monastic. And one of them is to continuously reflect that you are now living a different way of life. Right? Now, this is, people, I've heard people say, yeah, I'm friends with Bhante so-and-so and things like that. And you could say, yeah, I guess, kinda, but it's important to understand what the difference between having a friendship with a monastic is, well, at least should be quite different than having a friendship with your fellow layperson, right? A monastic is supposed to be somebody who is in the world, but kind of a little bit aloof from it, right? You're not, monastics obviously can become very close with lay people. Lay people work with monastics and helping the monastery and things like that. But, we have to be very careful that even though we're working together on the same team, as it were, that we have an understanding of what it means to be a monastic. And part of that is to, even though we're supposed to have some kind of contact with laity every day, it's not supposed to be like a buddy-buddy friendship. It is supposed to be a little bit different. Now, of course, you can read in the early text, it was a bit more, what would you call, equal back then than it is today, in terms of hierarchy and such things. But this is still an important thing to understand. And so when you choose to become a monastic, it's not about you and yourself and your own, awakening, and I'm going to just go and do my thing. No, you enter into an ancient tradition, an ancient organization, right? And so when you do that, when somebody chooses, and this is why monastics should be very careful who they ordain, because they're allowing whoever they're ordaining to put on robes and represent the Sangha, right? This very ancient group of men and women who have followed the Buddhist paths, who became, the word Sakyaputta or Sakyadita, right? Sons and daughters of the Sakyan, of the Buddha. So this is, I guess, a little bit of the background and the context of what I wanted to talk about in terms of the context of being a monastic within the greater frame.
Yeah, I would also add to that so becoming a monastic is a bit like joining a big extended family. So there's this global family with somewhere around 1 million members or so. I haven't actually looked at the statistics in a few years. We've got about 1 million or so members around the world. It's this huge extended family of bhikkhus and bhikkhunis who there's a certain amount of fundamental care for each other, which anywhere you go in the world, we recognize each other and we care about each other and we see what we can do to support each other and help each other. And actually, this is the attitude the Buddha said we should have. There's an interesting story that we find in the Vinaya, where there was a monk who was apparently quite unpleasant and hard to get along with. and none of the other monks liked him. And one day this monk got sick, and none of the other monks wanted to take care of him because he was such an unpleasant character. And the Buddha saw this monk just lying there really sick, and no one was taking care of him. And the Buddha, well, first the Buddha himself bathed the sick monk and brought water and medicine and took care of the sick monk. But then he called together the community and he started harassing them, like, well, what's wrong with you people? Like, when somebody joins the Sangha, they become like your brothers and sisters. They become like a member of your family, and you should look after them with the same dedication and care that you would have for your own family members. So this is an important element of monastic life. It is joining this family. And that goes both ways. So we have a commitment to looking after each other. So it's not just you join the family and you expect everyone to care about you, but also it means that whenever you meet another Buddhist monastic, there's a certain obligation to be respectful, be thoughtful, be kind, be attentive, see what you can do to help with their practice. So those are a few thoughts. Do you want to add some more thoughts, or should we maybe look at some of the comments?
Questions. Yes, thanks, Monty.
Okay, so we have first question is from CB, who asks, I'm curious how someone who lives a lay life with a lot of variety adjusts to the strict, structured life of a monastic in the long run.
Fine, I can take that.
Okay.
Well, I would say obviously each one of us has a different story, so maybe I can talk about it in first person a little bit. But in general, I would say through this passion with a lot of variety. I mean, how many different flavors of ice cream do you need to get until you're like, this is not really that satisfying. Let me try something else that might be a little bit more satisfying, which is not in the realm of ice cream. Right? But if we don't actually have, maybe we've only tried one flavor of ice cream and we kind of think that this flavor kind of sucks, but we see all the other flavors from the window and we're kind of like, I'm pretty sure that if I had that other flavor of ice cream, I'm going to be happy. And then we have one and then they're like, oh, a third one, etc. So personally, for me, it's been actually just moving to New York City and having all the different types of flavors of ice cream that you can possibly have. And being ambitious, as I used to be as a lay person, and even more so as a monastic, but the right type of ambition of eradicating greed, hatred, and delusion. But back then, with the worldly ambition that I had, I was not shy into trying every single type of like things that, like sensuality, in the realms of sensuality. And I was so unsatisfying. There's two types of dukkha that we can talk about: the dukkha of not getting what you want and the dukkha of getting what you want. And sometimes actually the dukkha of getting what you want is much more bitter than the first one. Because the first one, you're like, I'm just unsatisfied because I didn't get that X, Y, and Z, whether it's promotion, whether it's the job, whether it's the relationship, whether it's the group of friends, whether it's whatever it is that we think is going to make us happy. But when we actually get what we want, when we actually madly fall in love, when we actually do achieve, certain conditions that we aspire to, and we're still unhappy, well, that sucks. That really sucks. So I think that's when actually really, like, my mind was ready to understand the teachings of the Buddha. I still remember before actually going to Bhavana Society for that retreat, when then I met Bhante Sudaso and my actual serious Buddhist practice started. But I still remember that thought appeared in my mind. What the hell am I supposed to do next? I literally have no idea what to do in terms of being happy. Like, I was like, what else should I chase? What else should I run after? Like, there was no kind of, my mind was depressed actually from a lot of things that were achieved. So yeah, so seeing through this lot of variety of feces, essentially. You're like, okay, there's a lot of variety of feces. Is this all that we have? Like, is this what life is supposed to be? And yeah, and then I went to the monastery, and actually I think it was Bhante Suddas or Bhante Ji, one of them, a monastic, that said everything is inherently unsatisfying. And I remember in that moment going, that's why I am still not happy. Everything is inherently unsatisfying. It doesn't matter what kind of variety. If you have the Italian variety, the British variety, the American variety, the Brooklyn variety, the Queens variety, the Manhattan variety, like literally, what kind of variety do you want? There's lots of variety in samsara, but it's all inherently unsatisfying.
I'd like to also mention that there's lots of variety in the monastic life. The only difference is you have no control over that variety. Like, you think you're going to just chill in the monastery, and it's like, oh, guess what? We're going to a house dawn. And I was like, oh, okay, we're going to a house dawn. I just wanted to be home, but now I have to go to a house. It's like, there's all kinds of stuff like that, right? There's lots of variety. You just have to like get over you just have to get over the fact that you have no control over it. So when it happens, right? It's not, you can't really, there's limits. You can go out and seek it a little bit, but mostly it just happens to you, and it's a lesson in acceptance and letting go, and just letting, this is what's happening, and I have no control over it. So the main issue is that I would say for a layperson is not to get over that there's no variety, is that you have no control over it. Right? That's a huge difference. Letting go of that control.
Yeah, and I would also add, actually, that was the main thing that shifted. Well, actually, a little bit before becoming a monastic, but basically, essentially, when I was a layperson and working with Bhante Suddas, I basically started living like a monk. So essentially, that kind of is where it started. So the shift from always doing what we like or chasing what we like to actually doing what is instead necessary, what is needed. So most of the time, actually, as monastics or living in monastery environments, we don't get to pick what we like to do. We just need to do something that is needed, that is useful. And paradoxically, I remember having this realization, the realization of the paradox, which then led me to also take vows and go forth, was, wow, I basically like really focused all my life in trying to do what I wanted and creating this like sort of artificial life where I'm hanging out with people that are really cool and interesting and I love and I really like, and I'm doing everything that I like listening to the music that I like and not listening to the music that I don't like, eating the food that I like and not the food that I don't like, all these likes and dislikes, and I'm miserable. And I was miserable. But now that I actually do all these things that I do not like doing, but are needed and are for the benefit of myself and others, which is essentially also offering spaces of Dharma, I'm much happier. It was such a counterintuitive, weird thing, and this is what the Dharma essentially gives you. The practice of the Dharma gives you these insights on how we have it all wrong. Like, we just keep on chasing happiness in the wrong spots and like thinking, yes, I need to do everything that I like and then I will be happy. And instead it's the other way around. That's so weird. I mean, not everything that you dislike, but but something that has a purpose that is wholesome.
Great. And Liesel asks, being a monastic monk, do you live in total seclusion, never leaving the monastery? No. So I understand that's done in some Catholic monasteries, but in the Buddhist monastic world, that's actually extraordinarily rare, almost unheard of. So our life is, well, first off, we're in daily interaction with lay people in most Buddhist monasteries. And sometimes we have periods of personal retreat, which can be anywhere from a few days to a few weeks, occasionally a few months, rarely a few years, but even then somebody has to bring you food every day. So you're never really in complete total isolation. And as far as not leaving the monastery, again, in the Buddhist monastic world actually were originally a tradition of wanderers. The original tradition the Buddha established was one of wanderers, wandering monks. And even when monasteries started to be established during the time of the Buddha also was very clear that it's dangerous to just stay in the same monastery all the time. That it's good to wander around at least a little bit once in a while, like get a broader perspective on things, not getting stuck on one place or one way of practicing. So actually in the Buddhist monastic world, especially after the first few years when one has one's basic training established, once one has completed one's basic training, it's quite common to travel a lot. It's quite common for monks to go from monastery to monastery and spend maybe just a few months here or a few months there. So yeah, I mean, definitely we're not obligated to stay in one place and not leave the monastery. In fact, that's extraordinarily uncommon.
Yeah, I would say that the Buddha, when you read the rules, you can see that the Buddha went out of his way to make it so that you couldn't hide away from lay people. Like there's even like a rule against having a vow of silence. Right? We're not allowed to have a vow of silence, right? But we think of, when a lot of people think of like monastics, we think vow of silence in a monastery, right? So there's a lot of differences between what we would think of like Western Christian kind of monastery compared to like Buddhism.
Yeah, actually in the Bhikkhuni Vinaya, we have a precept that we have to get out of the monastery as soon as the vasa is over. So as soon as the rain season is over. So yeah, as soon as it's over, I gotta go. Bye.
Which actually is happening.
Yes,
as soon as vasa is over, we're traveling.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And Yudi, who was the person who suggested the sutta this morning, delightful one about hell. So Yudi, I'm not joking, that was the sutta this morning.
Yeah, no, it's great.
Yeah, I was actually a bit surprised that somebody specifically requested a sutta about hell.
Keep it coming.
Yeah. So Yuri says, I have the monastic aspiration and I'm committed to my practice considering the hurdles of a layperson. I don't think it will happen in this lifetime because of my student loans. A total issue, right? So there is a rule in the Vinaya that we should not ordain somebody who has debt. And in fact, it's, if you ask for ordination at a monastery, usually that's one of the questions they'll ask. They'll ask, do you have any debt? And if the answer is yes, then usually they will tell you, go out and pay off your debts and come back when you have no more debts. So it's not a strict absolute requirement, but it is one of the rules that we have, and most monasteries will follow that rule. So yes, if you have loans, pay off your loans before you pursue monastic life. And if you're getting old, don't waste any time. Okay. Alex says, did you ever have aspirations in other religions?
You both look at me like, yeah, I guess when I was in like maybe a 12-ish, I kind of thought about being a Catholic priest. It kind of did. I was raised Catholic school my whole life until college, altar boy, youth group leader, the whole deal. And so, yeah, like, I wore robes most of my life, being an altar boy, most of my youth. And it was something that I thought about. Like when I decided, when I first started thinking about becoming a Buddhist monastic, the first person, who I told this to was my mother. And I said, Mom, remember when you thought I was going to be a Catholic priest? What about a Buddhist monk? And she kind of just looked at me weird, like, where is this coming from? And what are you talking about?
Same difference.
But yes, but no, there is, that's being in that milieu or in that kind of atmosphere. I'm sure definitely, I never thought I had no aspirations or thought that I've ever actually become a monk. It was just something that happened over time as I practiced. But I think because of that history, it did kind of make it a little bit easier for me in a way to kind of transition. I don't know.
Dante?
Well, I was actually raised with Protestant Christianity, which has no monks and no priests. So it just wasn't really an option for me. So I actually never really thought about it until I stopped being Christian. So when I was a teenager and I started exploring other ways of living, other options. But even then, I wasn't really interested. As a teenager, I was pretty committed to sensuality. It was only in my late teens when I started getting deeply into Buddhism that, when I was about 19, I was like, no, I really want to commit 100% to the Buddhist teachings. And that meant, for me, it meant becoming a monastic. But I never had aspirations to become ordained in any other religion. I was, because again, it's, for me, monastic life is about a deep commitment to a single path with a clear goal. And I never had that. So after exiting Protestantism, I never had that for anything until getting into Buddhism.
No, but but also yes, a little bit like Bhante J. Actually, I think it's kind of like the Catholic karma, in between wanting to be a ballerina, a lawyer, a fireman, and firewoman, whatever, I don't know.
Fire person.
Fire person. In Italian, it's gender neutral. Pompiere. Then I also wanted to be a monk. I was also an altar boy. Interestingly enough, I only learned here in the United States that apparently if you have this body, you're not supposed to be an altar boy. But I guess I just went to the priest in Milan and I was like, I want to do that too. And he was like, yeah, okay, sure. So I was an altar boy. And I do remember I was very fascinated by monastics, but then to actually consider it thoroughly, I lost faith at the age of 10. So I got distracted in samsara and pursued all sensualist pursuits. But then in hindsight, actually, once I became a monastic, I realized that I always wanted to be a monastic. It's just that I didn't, as an adult, like religion was just not part of my experience. So it was just not a place where I was looking for any answers. And actually, I was avoiding it like the plague. Monasticism was just not something that I ever looked into. And then when I encountered the teachings of the Buddha, I started going like, oh, there's something to this form. And I remembered also what appealed to me growing up in Italy in terms of monasticism. But yeah, definitely I never took any aspiration seriously. Any other aspiration. This one I take very seriously.
And Sarah says, when and why did you decide to take the step of becoming monastics? How did your family react? Well, I just touched on this briefly. So it was when I was 19 that I decided to move to a Buddhist monastery, and I went when I was 20. How did my family react? Well, my parents, and especially my father, were completely opposed. My father actually said that this was possibly the worst thing I could do with my life. He said something along those lines. The opposition mainly being that, once again, they were quite devout Protestant Christians. So the idea of me doing anything in any other religion was already pretty awful, but especially becoming ordained in another religion was, in their minds, it was just like outright evil. Other family members were mixed. Some were actually quite positive about it. Others were neutral or a bit negative. But overall, there's actually just a lot of confusion. Like people just not really understanding what it meant to become a Buddhist monk. Not really understanding also why somebody would want to do such a thing. Like why would somebody willingly give up access to sensuality? This is something which was just absolutely baffling to most of my family members. Why would somebody willingly take on a life of celibate, austere renunciation? It's just unthinkable. Kind of like in their minds, I was deliberately choosing to be unhappy. When in my mind, it was actually the opposite. I was deliberately choosing a lifestyle that supported the highest happiness. But yeah, as the years went by, they've gotten increasingly supportive, and nowadays they're all more or less on board to one degree or another. One of you want to talk about this?
Yes, Bhante Jay, maybe.
So when? Well, 2007, I started learning about Buddhism because I knew that's when I wanted to be a Buddhist. I became a Buddhist in 2008. And it was around 2010 that I started having the thoughts of, well, why don't I try this monk thing? And it took me a bunch of years. That's the next question. It took me a bunch of years because I had a job, a career, and a business, and a car payment, and all these other kind of things. It took me a while to actually get to that point. But then I was ready. And how did my family react? When I first nobody in my life thought I was serious until I even though they knew years before I wanted to become a monastic, but nobody took it seriously until I quit my job. Like when I resigned from my state position, they're like, oh, he's actually doing it. And I would say that they're mostly supportive. It wasn't like an anger or an aversion or anything. It was mostly sadness. Mm-hmm. I think that was the biggest thing. Very close, big, Italian-American family. We all basically lived in the same county our whole lives, even though we were adult. It was just a very close family thing. And so it was an obvious big loss that I just left. So it wasn't, there was really no aversion or hatred or even like we forbid you or else you're disowned or anything like that. It was just sadness.
Well, since my family is not Italian American, but Italian was a little bit more dramatic. So I think I didn't talk to my parents for a year after ordination. Things are much better now. They're actually visiting the monastery. But it was a little bit tragic at the very beginning. Actually, my parents were, I think the harshest that they've ever been in my life. My dad literally said, "You're the biggest disappointment I've ever had in my life." I can laugh about it now because it's been a long time. But I remember going like, oh, wow. But it was so interesting because I was so happy actually to have gone forward that I was literally like in that moment, it's those miracles of practicing the Dhamma, of like truly understanding where he was coming from and not taking it personally. One of those rare success cases with my parents, because they're the most challenging practice for me. But in that moment, I remember going like, well, I'm sorry that you feel this way because I'm actually very, very happy. But getting back to your original question, the first one, when and why did you decide to take the step of becoming a monastic? I actually first started basically living like a monastic and practicing like a monastic before deciding to become a monastic. It's not true, actually. At the very beginning, I wanted to become a monastic, but just temporarily, one of my million different things that I wanted to do before dying. I was like, I'd like to be a monastic for a period of time because I had heard about temporary ordination. But then kind of like the altar boy, I realized that was only for the monk boys. So it's a little bit more complicated to do. To do temporary ordination or even ordination actually as a female monastic. And that kind of like also understanding all the ordeals that they're are in Buddhism with people who have this particular body, I was like, and that's the last thing I want to ever get into. So I just started practicing as a layperson. I was quite happy practicing as a layperson. But then, yeah, I was living, as a monastic in a renunciant form for quite some time. And at a certain point, I also shaved my head to see if I was attached to my hair. And I just remember it had been 3 years, and I looked at myself in the mirror and I was like, okay, I look like a monastic. I live like a monastic. I talk like a monastic, kind of everything looks like a monastic. So what do I want to do? Like, I have to either in or out. And so then in that moment, I decided to, and also it was a point where I was really loving the practice of precepts and really appreciating the forms that the Buddha has given us. So I really fell in love with precept forms as a layperson, and I was ready to investigate, more joy of missing out, I guess. So then I decided to become a monastic, and it was just lovely. Yeah, as soon as I ordained, my mind was so full of metta. I was so delighted. I still remember, I was like, oh, the only thing I needed to do was put an ochre robe. I'm so close to enlightenment. And then after a week, all my defilements got ordained with me. And that's a sad story. But yeah, I'm so happy. Like, I've never been happier. Then my family kind of, they're still not 100% happy or approving, but they're understanding better. They definitely at the very beginning, they thought, apparently from their perspective, I always did weird things. So they thought this was, and there she goes with the weirdest thing now. So they were like, okay, it's going to be a phase, and she's going to get over it. So after a while, then, like, my brothers too, they were kind of like, this phase is lasting a little bit longer than the other phases, which is actually ironically true. Monastic life has made me the most stable and sedentary than I ever was as a layperson. So yeah, and I'm quite happy being a monastic.
Okay. And Julie says, did you have a lot of time to transition from lay life to monastic living? Well, in my case, so I started practicing Buddhism when I was 17, and it made such a dramatic effect on me so quickly that, again, by the time I was 19, I was quite clear that I wanted to become a monk. And I didn't have a lot of worldly attachments. I didn't have a big pile of debt. I didn't have car payments or any of that stuff. It was actually quite easy for me to just drop everything and move to a monastery. So I will say this: if you have even the slightest thought that you might want to become a monk at some point in the future, don't develop any kind of ties that are going to hold you back. So avoid getting into debt, avoid having children, avoid taking on any kind of major responsibilities that are hard to get out of. Because if you do decide to be a monk and you realize that you have 10 years of duties to work through first, you're going to be very disappointed. So yeah, for me, it was very quick. It wasn't much need for transition.
Same, because I had started a Buddhist organization with Bhante Sugdaso, so I had partly sold most of the stuff to offer free retreats to people in New York City. That's so funny. My older self, I'm kind of amused by it. And then some of it actually got destroyed because by mold in the basement, because when I was living at the monastery, I had to pack up most of my stuff in the basement, and then mold took care of it and destroyed it. And then the rest was destroyed actually by my preceptor, my Samadhi preceptor, Venerable Panyavati, who I had to ask several times for the going forth. And then when she agreed to ordain me, she was like, all right, okay, I'll ordain you in 2 weeks. And I was like, wait, I'm not ready in 2 weeks. How am I going to get rid of all these things? And so my mind started, creating all these lists of like how it was impossible to ordain in 2 weeks and do all the things in 2 weeks, et cetera, et cetera. And in that moment, it occurred to me that I was never going to be ready if I was not going to be ready in 2 weeks. So yeah, I closed my bank account. I got rid of everything in 2 weeks. Luckily, I didn't know how to drive, so I didn't have a driver's license. And luckily, I was always pretty unstable, so I always refused to like get any type of mortgages, etc. And I was never into procreating, so I didn't have children. So it was pretty smooth.
I think you already answered this. Yeah. And Julie says, can it be distracting for your practice when lay people come to the monastery to meditate?
Oh, it's great. Please keep coming.
Oh, I was going to say, yeah, kind of a little bit.
No.
Yeah, me too.
Oh, when lay people come to the monastery to meditate, it's great.
Yeah, it is great. I fully agree.
So why is it distracting?
Let's imagine you're in the midst of a deep, intensive meditation retreat, and everyone's very quiet, and they're following the schedule really well, and then suddenly a group of people show up, and they're not following the schedule, and they don't really understand what's going on, and they talk a lot and make noise and so on.
It's lay people come to this monastery to meditate.
This person doesn't know about lay people in monasteries,
though. So I would briefly say, yes, it can be a bit distracting, but the main attitude of mine is appreciation that people want to practice the Dhamma. So it actually goes back to the earlier thing about how monastic life helps you cultivate flexibility of mind, because you have so little control over so many things. So part of our life is the fact that lay people can come to the monastery and practice together with us. So whether you like it or don't like it, that's part of our life. And learning how to be okay with unexpected last-minute alterations in your life is just part of what it means to be a Buddhist monk. And that helps to cultivate an unshakable happiness of mind. So that, for example, years ago, random lay people showing up at the monastery unexpected would like put me into a fit of rage. But nowadays it's more like, oh, welcome, please come in. Yes, we'll set out a seat for you, no problem.
It might be the cultural difference.
No,
I am happy when people come to
It's 100% the culture difference. Like at Bhavana Society, I just get done with like 40 people, be there for a week, a retreat. It's exhausting. Okay, I'm going to take a break. I don't want to see anybody. All of a sudden, like 30 people just show up on a bus. Hey, yeah. I'm like, oh, Jesus. Yeah.
But the question here is, lay people come to the monastery to meditate, not show up on it.
This rare lay person who comes to meditate is a good person. That's not a distraction. No problem.
This is becoming a therapy session for monastery.
It is. It is. See, you have to. Even though I reflect on like in Buddhist cultures, like the monastery, the temple is a social place. People come and they're just used to showing up at any time. And as a Westerner, we're like, just like Bhante was saying, he's like, you come between these hours and this hours, and then this, I have free time here and this. You have to learn how to get over that. That's all.
So you asked, do you have practices that help to protect your practice? Yes, 2 in particular: equanimity and compassion. Realistically, 3. Patience. Equanimity, compassion, patience. If you want to survive as a monastic, you need to have bucket loads of these 3 things. Equanimity, compassion, patience. If you're short on any one of those, you're not going to last.
And learning how to hide in your room.
That also, we call it the Theravada exit. The ability to disappear and not be found when it is necessary to disappear and not be found.
Okay. Oof.
Okay, good times. Ryan says, do you require giving up all your $$?
Correct.
Yeah, so they're in strict monasteries. Monks give up all their money. So when one is getting ready for ordination, then one gets rid of all of one's financial assets, so that at the time of ordination, your net worth is zero. You have absolutely nothing, which is so delightful. It actually is really great. Jay Kala says, I'll be starting my ordination process at Forest Dhamma near the beginning of 2023.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
I hope all goes well for you.
May you swiftly attain awakening.
Yes. CB asks, how do I find out if liberation is my number one goal? How do I know if I really want it more than anything?
Nobody can tell you that. You have to know. Like you have to feel it in your gut that even if you don't necessarily believe 100% yet that you are going to have another life, but just the thought of having to go through life again, you're like, okay, I'm done. Get me off this samsara train. Let's go to awakening. And like, you just want to just like, and again, it's not an aversion. It's not like, oh, I hate this life. I hate this. That people mistake that. If you have an aversion, you're going the other way. Mm-hmm. You're actually making it worse for yourself and your samsaric state longer. It's wisdom that arises, nibbida, dispassion, disenchantment that arises, and you say, I don't want to do this again. And then so your mind thinks, when you look at the victory cry of the Arahants and you think, oh, this sounds amazing, right? Victory cry of the Arahants. Hina jati, birth is ended. Vusatang brahmacharyang, the holy life has been lived. Katang karaniyang, done is what has to be done. Naparang itatai tipajanati. There is no more for this world. When you think, oh, that sounds nice. When will I say my victory cry? Like that. When you have like those kind of thoughts, then that's your goal. Yeah.
Yeah. So put together your bucket list. And if there's anything, your bucket list should be exactly one item long, and it should say complete awakening. If there's anything else on your bucket list, you're not ready yet.
It's true.
So in that case, I actually recommend go out and pursue the things on your bucket list, and you'll realize that they suck. And at some point, you'll realize you're just wasting time.
Well, the only addendum I would say to that is, the person can also have a bit of a goal to share the Dhamma with people too. It's somewhat connected, but
it is connected.
Yeah, it fits in. That's part of attaining awakening is actually recognizing that helping others understand the Dhamma also helps oneself understand the Dhamma. Yeah. That comes from the understanding of karma. This is another reason why we don't shut ourselves off in complete isolation, is because helping others is helping ourselves. These are not separate things. And Julie says, can you describe briefly the friendship between a monk and another monk at the monastery? How does it compare to friendships in lay life? So I was actually a layperson for a very short period of time. Pretty soon, less than half my life will have been as a layperson.
Well, Bhante J, actually, I think this is a follow-up to what he was saying earlier.
What are your thoughts on this?
A monk and another monk. Well, monastics are people. So the relationships between monastics are going to be not all that different than other people's relationships, right? There's going to be likes and dislikes, and there's going to be people who feel, connected to each other and people who don't feel connected to each other. It's just the way it is. And it can be very similar to, like anybody who you're connected with that you have the same goal, right? You can have that feeling of camaraderie, right? That you have the same goal of being a Buddhist monastic. But yeah, I guess it's not hugely different. Now, again, what I was talking about before was like the relationship between a monastic and a layperson. This is just between two different monastics.
Yeah, to me, the relationship, friendship between two monks, it's a bit more like siblings. So there's more a sense of, like I said earlier, like we're part of the same family, and there's a certain mutual obligation which goes a bit deeper than a mere friendship. Yeah, something in your mind?
Just what you said. And I think there's, for myself, there's just an admiration that people are committed to liberation. That is different than in a friendship in life. There's like as you said, like family, there's like a respect and just like that admiration that people are on the same path.
Yeah. Actually, the word which it's commonly translated as harmony or harmonious, but the Pali word is samaggi, which literally means on the same path. So the Buddha says that monks should be on the same path, which means the path to liberation, the path to full awakening. So Sarah asks, do you think it is necessary, some kind of transition process to change the lifestyle in general? What specific things did you stop doing in your life, and what activities did you include in your life? Well, again, for me, it was very swift. I started meditating every day and studying the Buddhist teachings, and very quickly I lost interest in ordinary lay life. Very quickly I lost interest in ordinary sensual pursuits and ordinary worldly goals, and yeah, within a couple of years I was pretty clear that I didn't really want to be pursuing ordinary lay goals. I wasn't interested in making money. I wasn't interested in getting PhDs. I wasn't interested in climbing a career ladder or anything like that. I wasn't interested in having kids or owning houses or any of that. It just wasn't the least bit interesting to me. The only thing that was interesting to me was making progress in developing samadhi and panya. So for me, the transition was extremely swift. So I think if somebody really wants to become a monastic, then the transition will happen by itself. You'll just naturally lose interest in things. Like the Buddha gives the example of a child. A child plays with toys, but at some point the child just naturally loses interest in playing with toys. And they become interested in more adult things. So in the same way, at some point, if one is really set on awakening, then at some point you'll just naturally start to lose interest in worldly things, and you'll be set upon developing spiritual qualities instead. Any thoughts on this?
Sure. Well, yes. I mean, I would say that absolutely practicing the precepts fully and full-heartedly, I think you say in English. So
Wholeheartedly.
Wholeheartedly. It's too many arts. The major difference that happened in my life as a layperson was actually, well, taking the 5 precepts seriously and stopping to drink. Literally, it was night and day. My experience with my friends from my previous life within this life. You know, I was keeping on hanging out with them, but not drinking. And it was horrible. I mean, it was really, really boring after 20 minutes in it, because then they started getting intoxicated and, you know, then being a little bit silly. And I was completely sober and not having fun anymore. So then you also, I think I remember having this insight of like, wow, this is basically what I've been doing for the past at least 10 years of my life. Like there's a lot of, kind of just idle conversations, idle talk, like wasting a lot of time. Yeah, I'm not particularly interested in doing that. So the more you start renouncing actually worldly things, then it will be easier to step into monastic life. I had also, but for other reasons, I had significantly reduced my access to any type of music, entertainment, etc. But that was also, I mean, it was related to Buddhism in the way that they're Buddhist practice, but I think I was doing them more in for different purposes, which I won't get into right now. But what it did serve was that it gave me actually the strength to go into a monastery with very little sort of sensory input, and have zero problems. Like I had no problem that there was no TV. As a matter of fact, I hadn't watched TV since I was like 19 years old. So I hadn't watched it for a while, many years, or had no problem being without watching a bunch of different movies and listening to music and so forth. And that can be actually, ironically, one of the biggest things that people, especially in this country, struggle with the most, because American society is so like rooted in entertainment. It's so emphasized, and that's big struggle. So yeah, start letting go of all these different things and practice the precepts full-heartedly. And then from 5, step up to 8. And then if you're happier and happier, then yeah, take 10, and then take 311 or 227.
And Misty asks, is samsara impermanent? This is off topic, but briefly, the answer is yes. Anonymous says, if you go to a house dana, if meat makes you sick, can you turn it down? So technically speaking, we are not required to eat what people give us. However, we are not allowed to ask for any particular things unless we are sick. If you go to a house dana, then technically you're not required. If somebody gives you meat, you're not required to eat it. But I will say this, we live a alms mendicant life, which means that we can't always control what food we have. In fact, we usually can't really control what we're given. So sometimes you will be in a situation where you're given things that you really don't want to eat, but you realize if you don't eat it, then you won't be getting enough food. So at some point you have to make a decision. So when I first went to live in a Theravada monastery, I was vegan, and I'd been vegan for years. And after a few days I had been there, I remember one day when a group of people brought dana to the monastery, and literally every single thing on the table had some kind of dead animal in it. Literally everything. Like there was no plain rice. The rice had fish mixed into it. Like there was no plain vegetables. The vegetables had meat mixed into it. Like literally, there was nothing on the table that one could eat while being even a vegetarian, let alone a vegan. And that was the day when I realized that as a monk, I was going to have to be a little more flexible around dietary preferences. So yeah, if you become a monk, you do actually have to face this fact that you cannot control what you eat. Sometimes you're not going to get what you want, and sometimes you're going to get what you don't want. And you need to learn how to be okay with that and not make a problem out of it. For some people, this is a huge difficulty. And for others, it's not a problem at all. So I recommend making it not a problem. Anything else? Okay. And Ryan says, how often do you visit family or they visit you?
Dr. Jane?
Well, depends. I guess my understanding of a general sort of rule, kind of, or a general sort of practice is like going home once a year to visit family. Although you have examples of like Ajahn Chah, who literally made a monastery in his hometown, and his mother would come and bring dana every day and things like that. So there's no like rule that's like you can't be around your family or anything like that, but you have to make sure that you have that kind of separation. Like you when you become a monastic, you have to make sure, like I always say in my whole life, family was always number one until the Dhamma was number one, right? Family's maybe a close number 2 still, but you know, the Dhamma is more important. So when that, you know, if my mom is sick or whatever, I'll go help my mom. But the most important thing is the Dhamma to me, right? And so you do have to make sure that even if you have a close connection to family, you're going to have to let that go, right? You know, and it's going to not be easy. You know, and it's not like you never see them again or anything like that, but you have to, in your own mind at least, learn to kind of break that connection and not be too attached in one way or the other. Obviously they're your family, right? And they raised you and all that kind of stuff. And, you might be close to them. You might not even care about them. You might want to just be happy that you never see them again. But no, each monastery, each abbot is going to have different rules on that. And, if you're depending on your life situation, you might see them more, you might see them less. If they're close, they can come visit usually there's no problems with families members visiting monasteries. So yeah.
Yeah, during the years of my basic training, so the first 5 years, the basic rule was don't go to see your family more often than once a year. And they have to arrange it and set it up for you. That was another basic requirement. But as Bhante J was saying, they could come visit you at the monastery as often as they want. So there's one monk at the monastery who his mom was there really frequently. She also didn't live anywhere close to the monastery, but she would be there several times a year. She would come and stay for a few days. But yeah, about once a year. That's been a pretty constant for me over the years. Anything, or should we keep going? We have a lot of questions, so I think we should keep going. GJ says, how do you manage to practice monastic precepts? Just do it. Like, just go and live in a monastery that takes Vinaya seriously, and they will help you. They'll teach you how to follow the rules. They'll help you understand the rules. Yeah, if you want to follow the precepts, you go to a monastery that takes precepts seriously. They're really not that difficult. It seems like a lot until you start actually doing it. Then you realize it's actually not that big of a deal.
You learn them and then you practice them.
Yeah. And sometimes you make mistakes and you learn from your mistakes and you move on.
And I think Celestino's question is not on topic, but you can ask it tomorrow for monk chat.
It's a great question, by the way. Celestino, great question. So we'll talk about it tomorrow. Anonymous says, is it all debts, like what's on your credit score? So a credit check is not a normal part of a monastic ordination. It's just whether or not you have debts. Sarah says, what do you spend your free time doing when you're not doing any Dharma activity? Can a monastic have hobbies other than Dharma activities? Why would you want to? Drawing, photography, crocheting, to give examples.
Actually, all of these can be related to the Dharma. So drawing the Dharma, photographing, monastics, I don't know, crocheting, well, as long as it's not like pink unicorns and stuff like that. But if it's all in this kind of palette and monochrome, then it's totally fair game. And actually you'll have a lot of monastic friends, because then you can give them the gifts and they will all be happy and go like, oh, that's great. So it's kind of funny actually that you asked that question, because that was one of my best friends from my previous life within this life, when I went to meet them with Bhante Suttaso last year in Italy. And at a certain point we're talking and talking and talking and then talking, and then at a certain point he's like, so do you have any other interests except for the Dhamma and Buddhism? Like, do you actually go and see, because, you know, he met me at a time when I had a lot of different interests. It was like, do you go to the opera, or do you read, like, I don't know, like a book that is not Buddhist related? Do you do anything that doesn't have to do with Buddhism? And I was like, no. And he was like, no, yeah, we just don't. And actually it didn't even really occur to me until he asked me that question, which is complete, like, you know, fair enough question. But I also know the answer why. It was not necessarily even because of the precepts, but rather I remember at a certain point when I was a lay person, I started having this dispassion towards all my past interests. So yeah, once you get that, like, the taste for the Dhamma, then all you're interested in is well, just immersing yourself into the Dhamma more and more and more. So there's nothing else that is interesting. At least that's my experience. Everything has to be pointed in that direction so I can understand the Dharma better.
And Rick says, for over 11 years, I've chosen to create a home/spiritual retreat in an A-frame house on 2.5 acres on rolling hills farmland with plenty of wooded areas. Sounds great.
Yeah, sounds great.
I live like a monastic, living in seclusion, except when I show up in love and service to others. In addition, I practice compassion by rehabilitating 3 highly abused Great Pyrenees. Great. Can you share some guidance for the people who have monastic aspirations but are too ill or old to ordain? Sounds to me like you're doing pretty well so far. So I don't really have much to add except follow the Eightfold Path. And it sounds to me like you're off to a really great start. So I would probably just say keep doing what you're doing.
I think Rick should look up Gatikara.
Gatikara the potter.
Yeah, Gatikara is a good role model for that.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. And Anonymous says, do you give up everything when ordination or full ordination?
Yeah.
Almost everything. Yeah. Yep. Mary says, can a widow or widower become a monastic? I think your husband is still alive. Yeah, I mean, it really depends upon each individual monastery and each individual preceptor, and taking each individual case. Yeah, there's no prohibition against widows or widowers becoming monastics.
No.
Yeah, there's no problem there.
As long as they're not still alive.
Well, actually, even if they're still
Well, yeah, then
alive,
they
if you
can-
have the permission,
yes, the
like it's
permission,
totally
yeah.
fine.
Right. And wow, Sarah has lots of questions. Interesting.
Great.
This might be more than an idle interest. So Sarah says, when you have the aspiration to monasticism, what would be practically the most correct way to get there? Would it be necessary, for example, first of all, to volunteer in a Dharma center? Just go live in a monastery. If you're interested in becoming a monastic, go and spend some time living in a monastery. And one of 2 things will happen. Either you'll be horrified and disgusted by this awful way of living and you'll run right back to the joys of sensuality, or you'll be interested in staying longer.
True stories. We've had plenty of both.
Yeah. And if you're interested in staying longer, then it may get to a point where you realize this actually is what you want to be doing with your life, at least for the time being. Yeah, there's really no way to know until you start spending time in monasteries. Until then, it's all speculation and stories. And CB asks, what about aging monastics? I think things are a bit better now than they were in history, but I've heard of a lot of people disrobing due to health reasons as they age. Are there supports for aging? Actually, in traditional Buddhist countries, there's a tremendous amount of support for aging monastics. In fact, there's a lot of lay people in Buddhist countries who they love the opportunity to take care of aging monastics. So there's actually no problem there. So if somebody disrobes because of old age, there's usually something else going on.
And there's also a lot of older people that their kids are grown or whatever, and then they become monastics.
Yeah, there's actually monasteries in Asia which are specifically for that purpose, for older people who want to spend their last couple decades of life as a monastic. There's monasteries where that's their purpose. They're not common in the West, but in Asia, there's quite a number of them. And Rick is asking, can you spell the name of the person I should use as inspiration?
Is it G-H?
Ghatikara. Gatikara. Yep. That's the last question from online. Anything from the residents here? Questions related to the topic? Yes.
You're ordained already, though.
Well, and you spoke a bit about this, but we talked about the importance of dependence in that time period and its development of someone's monastic life, and why it's so important. I think a lot of people just forget about that or skip over that. want to skip over it.
Yes, thank you. So Samanera Metiko is asking to speak a bit about dependence. So when someone becomes ordained, that's not the end of the story. It's actually the beginning of your training. And it's a period of several years of training where one has to live with a senior monastic. And there's a commitment from the senior monastic to train the junior monastic and look after their needs. And also there's a commitment from the junior monastic to look after the teacher's needs. And this is a critical part of our training. So you can't just get ordained and then instantly be a perfect monk. You have to go through a period of it's a bit like an apprenticeship of learning how to be a monk and how to do it in a wholesome and supportive way. So if somebody skips out on dependence, which does happen from time to time, usually the results are quite bad. You wind up with someone who doesn't really know how to live a monastic life, and they wind up making mistakes. But it's so the period of dependence is a really important part of what we do.
Disrobing is also like very common after skipping dependence.
Yeah. And we have a question from Cam. Cam says, when you are craving for something intensely, let's say pineapple pie, how do you manage the craving and any other bodily emotional craving?
Well, personally, I just remember all the times that I had pineapple pie or any other bodily, emotionally thing that I'm craving right now. And I remember how unsatisfying it was after getting what I wanted. And yeah, then this passion ensues. I'm kind of like, okay, yeah, whatever. It wouldn't be any different anymore. I see you, Mara. I see you. It was so interesting, actually. After the week of like amazingness after ordination, then actually the following weeks, I remember Mara was like bombarding me with all sorts of different weird cravings. At a certain point, I was meditating and like thinking about croissants. And I was like, wow, I'm just dumbing down. Like I never had any craving for croissants, not even like in meditation, like let alone in meditation. I mean, not even as, whatever. It's definitely not in meditation or, it was like at least before ordination, I would have some sophisticated like thoughts appearing in meditation. And now I'm just thinking croissant, 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 butter, croissant. Like I was like, this is completely ridiculous. And at a certain point, it occurred to me, actually, I think I was talking to Bante, and Bante was like, oh yes, Mara normally attacks newly ordained monastics. And then I started going, I see you, Mara. I see you, Mara. Like the Bhikkhunis in the Bhikkhuni Samyutta, and sad and disappointed, Mara goes away as soon as you see Mara's tricks, and just goes away.
Okay, and we have another question. Sheridan asks, could you speak about the connection between monastics of different traditions? What are the harmonies and what are the potential struggles? Well, generally speaking, my experience has been that when dealing with senior monastics of different traditions, there is very little struggle and a lot of mutual appreciation. Usually difficulties come actually with people who are very new to practice and have a zealous commitment to their particular tradition. That's usually where there can be conflicts. But usually people who are senior, well-seasoned practitioners tend to appreciate other Buddhist traditions more readily. So harmonies, well, I mean, ultimately, we're all practicing the teachings of the Buddha, and we're all practicing for attaining awakening. So that kind of cuts across all divides. We're all practicing the Noble Eightfold Path for realizing the Four Noble Truths. So again, this kind of cuts through all divides. The potential struggles mainly come about when we have a dogmatic fixation on our favorite way of practicing, to the point where it's hard for us to see that not everybody is exactly the same as ourselves. So maybe we really like a particular style of practice and it works really well for us, But somebody else prefers a different style of Buddhist practice, and it works well for them. So it's important to learn how to put down our attachment to our particular way of practicing, and to appreciate that we're all on the path to awakening. Yeah, so those are my thoughts on this.
Oh, sure. That's
Do you have anything to
add? For me, it's basically the same as dealing with like doing interfaith dialogue. It's like, we come together on what's similar and we respect the differences. If I'm with a Mahayana monk, I have no desire to argue, well, these bodhisattvas or whatever, blah, 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 arahants and blah, blah. It's like, I don't have any time for that. There's not enough time in this life to worry about these stupid things. So you just kind of enjoy the time with the person and learn what you can from them. And,
Also, fun is to do cultural exchange, like take turns chanting in each other's different styles. It can actually be really exciting. I have to say, Theravada chanting is so dull. The Chinese chanting is way more fun. Japanese chanting, way more fun.
The ladies, they have like the
Tibetan chanting, admittedly, is also pretty dull, but Chinese and Japanese chanting, delightful.
But to use the deep voice is cool, though.
Incomprehensible.
Anyway, so the potential challenges are likes and dislikes, as with everything in samsara.
And attachment to views. Actually, the Buddha says that lay people fight over sensual pleasure. Monastics fight over views and opinions. So this is actually where we have the biggest struggle, is like where we get caught on our particular opinions about Dhamma.
Only this is true. Everything else is wrong.
And last question, Cam says, should we send croissants?
I see you, Mara.
You can send whatever you want. And that's the last question. So I think we can go ahead and end with 3 sadhus. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And we'll see you next time.